At 72 years old, Dorothy sat in the cramped middle seat of the airplane, her knees pressed tightly against the seat in front of her. The narrow space made her feel trapped, and her back already ached from the uncomfortable position. She was flying to London to see her daughter Emma after 3 long years of silence between them. The flight was expensive, and Dorothy had saved for months to afford even this basic ticket, counting every penny and skipping meals to make it possible. The argument with Emma had been terrible. Words were said that couldn't be taken back, and pride had kept them apart for far too long. Now, with her 73rd birthday approaching, Dorothy realized that life was too short to hold on to anger. She had swallowed her pride and bought this ticket, hoping that Emma would give her a chance to make things right. Dorothy shifted uncomfortably in her seat, trying to find a position that didn't hurt her arthritic joints. The young couple next to her seemed to have so much room, and she wondered why some passengers looked so comfortable while others, like herself, seemed to suffer through every minute of the flight. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Dorothy struggled with her heavy carry-on bag, trying to stuff it into the overhead compartment. Her arms shook with the effort, and she felt embarrassed as other passengers waited behind her in the narrow aisle. She had packed too much. But everything seemed important for this trip to reconnect with her daughter. A kind flight. Attendant named James noticed Dorothy's struggle immediately. He was a middle-aged man with gentle eyes and a warm smile that reminded her of her late husband. "Let me help you with that," he said, effortlessly lifting her bag into the compartment, "We have special assistance for passengers over 70. Most people don't know about it." Dorothy looked at him with surprise and curiosity. "Special assistance? What do you mean?" James sat down in the empty seat beside her for a moment, speaking in a quiet, caring voice. "Free upgrades when available, priority boarding so you don't have to wait in long lines, complimentary meals, and help with luggage like this. We also have wheelchair assistance if you need it. And we can arrange for someone to help you navigate the airport. Airlines don't advertise it much, but it's there if you ask." Dorothy's eyes widened with amazement. She had been flying the same way for decades, accepting discomfort and stress as part of the experience. Free upgrades? Really? "Yes, really," James said with a nod. "And priority boarding means you get on the plane first, so you can take your time getting settled. No more struggling with bags while people push past you." Dorothy felt a wave of emotions wash over her. For years, she had avoided flying because of the cost and stress. She thought about all the times she could have visited Emma if she had known about these benefits, all those missed birthdays, holidays, and important moments that she had skipped because flying seemed too difficult and expensive. "Why don't airlines tell us about this?" Dorothy asked, her voice filled with wonder and a touch of frustration. James shrugged kindly, his expression showing understanding. "They hope you don't ask. It saves them money. But you deserve to know. Travel should be comfortable at your age. You've earned the right to fly with dignity." As the plane lifted into the sky, Dorothy felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Real, genuine hope that filled her chest with warmth. Maybe it wasn't too late to change things. Maybe there were other opportunities she had missed simply because she didn't know they existed. If airlines had been hiding these benefits, what else was out there that she didn't know about? She thought about her small pension and how she had struggled to afford this trip. If she could fly more affordably and comfortably, maybe she could visit Emma more often. Maybe they could rebuild their relationship slowly. One visit at a time. Dorothy pulled out a small notebook from her purse and began writing down everything James had told her. Her handwriting was shaky from the plane's movement, but she was determined to capture every detail. This knowledge felt like a precious gift, and she knew she had to share it with other seniors who might be struggling just like she had been as she wrote. Dorothy smiled for the first time in months. This trip to see Emma was already changing her life in ways she never expected. She looked out the window at the clouds below and felt ready for whatever came next, back home in her small village outside Manchester. Dorothy couldn't stop thinking about what she had learned on the airplane. Every day, the conversation with James played over and over in her mind. She had successfully reunited with her daughter Emma, and their relationship was slowly healing. But the knowledge about airline benefits felt like a secret too important to keep to herself. Dorothy spent her Tuesday and Thursday mornings volunteering at the local community center, helping serve tea and biscuits to other seniors. It was a warm, friendly place where people shared stories and supported each other through life's challenges. The center had become like a second home to her, especially after her husband had passed away 5 years earlier. At the community center, she had two very dear friends who meant the world to her. William was 75, a retired teacher with kind eyes and a gentle manner. He had taught mathematics for 40 years and had always been the type of person who helped others solve their problems. But since his wife Margaret passed away 2 years ago, William had become quiet and withdrawn. He missed visiting his grandchildren in Scotland terribly, but felt completely overwhelmed by the idea of flying alone. The thought of navigating airports and dealing with crowds without his beloved wife by his side seemed impossible. Rose was 80 years old, a gentle woman with silver hair and a soft voice who always wore a small cross round her neck. She had raised 4 children mostly on her own after her husband died young, and now she lived on a small pension that barely covered her basic needs. Rose dreamed constantly of visiting her son Michael in Ireland, but worried about the cost of travel. She had not seen him in over 3 years, and the separation was breaking her heart. She often talked about how much she missed holding her grandchildren, but she believed travel was completely beyond her financial reach. One rainy afternoon, the 3 friends sat round their usual table in the community center, sipping tea and sharing stories. Dorothy could barely contain her excitement as she pulled out her small notebook, the same one she had used on the airplane. "I have something absolutely amazing to share with you both," Dorothy said, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. "Something that could change everything for us." William and Rose leaned forward with curiosity as Dorothy opened her notebook and began explaining the airline benefits she had discovered during her trip to see Emma. She told them about James, the kind flight attendant, and how he had opened her eyes to a whole world of services she never knew existed. "Free assistance with luggage?" William asked, his eyebrows rising with surprise. "Priority boarding, so we don't have to wait in those terrible long lines?" Dorothy nodded eagerly. "Yes, and that's just the beginning. There are complimentary meals, help getting through the airport, and even free upgrades when seats are available." Rose clasped her hands together tightly, and Dorothy could see tears forming in her eyes. "This could change everything." Rose whispered, "I've been wanting to see my son Michael for so long, but I thought I could never afford it." The 3 friends felt a spark of hope that none of them had experienced in years. They decided immediately that they needed to learn more about these benefits. The next day, they walked together to the village library, where the library Anne helped them use the computers to research airline policies. Dorothy had never been comfortable with technology, but with William's help, she learned to navigate websites and find information. They spent hours making phone calls to different airlines, asking detailed questions about senior passenger services. To their amazement, they discovered even more benefits than Dorothy had initially learned about. There were special dietary meals for seniors, preferred seat assignments away from busy areas, and even special programs designed specifically for seniors traveling alone. Why didn't we know about this before? Rose wondered aloud, shaking her head in disbelief. Dorothy thought carefully before answering. Because we never asked, she replied. We accepted that travel was difficult and expensive. We thought that discomfort and high costs were just part of flying. But we have rights as passengers. Especially at our age. William smiled genuinely. For the first time in months, Dorothy could see a glimmer of his old self returning. Maybe it's time to stop accepting limitations and start asking for what we deserve, he said with growing confidence. The three friends made a pact that day. They would not only use this knowledge for themselves, but they would share it with every senior they met. They realized that thousands of older people were probably struggling with travel just like they had been, simply because no one had told them about these benefits. 3 months later, the three friends stood at Manchester Airport, their hearts beating fast with a mixture of nervousness and excitement. They had spent weeks planning this trip together to Dublin to visit Rose's son Michael. It would be their first chance to put their newfound knowledge about airline benefits to the real test. Dorothy carried her small notebook in her purse, and all three of them had practiced what they would say at the check-in counter. Rose clutched her small suitcase tightly, still hardly believing that she was actually going to see her son after 3 long years. She had called Michael the week before to tell him she was coming, and he had cried with joy over the phone. William had packed light, remembering his wife's advice about traveling smart. And he wore his best jacket for the occasion. Dorothy felt proud as she looked at her two dear friends, knowing that together they were about to prove that age was not a barrier to adventure. The airport was busy and loud, filled with travelers rushing in all directions. In the past, this chaos would have overwhelmed all three of them. But today they felt prepared and confident. They had studied the airport layout online and knew exactly where to go. At the check-in counter, Dorothy took a deep breath and stepped forward. Her voice was steady as she spoke to the young woman behind the desk. Excuse me, we are all over 70 years old. Could you please tell us about the senior passenger services available? The young woman looked up with a genuine smile. That immediately put them at ease. Of course, we have priority boarding, which means you'll get on the plane first. And let me see if there are any complimentary upgrades available today. She typed quickly on her computer, and her smile grew wider. You're in luck. I can move you to seats with extra legroom at no charge. Would you like assistance with your luggage? William squeezed Dorothy's hand tightly, and she could feel his excitement. It was actually working. Just like they had hoped, Rose stood beside them with wide eyes, amazed at how easy it was when you simply asked the right questions. The check-in process was smooth and pleasant. The airline staff treated them with respect and kindness, making sure they understood all the services available to them. They were given special boarding passes marked with priority boarding, and the staff explained exactly where they needed to go next at the security checkpoint. They were directed to a shorter, faster-moving line, specifically for seniors and passengers needing assistance. The security officers were patient and helpful, giving them plenty of time to remove their shoes and gather their belongings without feeling rushed. Rose, who had been worried about this part of the process, found herself relaxing as the staff guided them through each step. When they reached their boarding gate, they sat together and watched other passengers rushing round. Within minutes, an announcement came over the loudspeaker calling for priority boarding. All passengers over 70 and those needing assistance may board now, the gate agent announced. Dorothy, William, and Rose exchanged excited glances as they stood up and walked to the front of the line. Other passengers stepped aside politely, and they felt respected rather than like a burden. Rose, who had been anxious about navigating the airport, felt her confidence growing with each small kindness they received. Dot as they walked down the narrow aisle of the airplane. Dorothy couldn't believe her eyes. There was James, the same flight attendant who had helped her months earlier during her trip to see Emma. He recognized her immediately, and his face lit up with a warm smile. "Well, look who's back. And you brought friends," James said with genuine happiness in his voice. Dorothy laughed, feeling like she was greeting an old friend. "I couldn't keep this wonderful secret to myself," she replied. "These are my dear friends, William and Rose." James helped them get settled in their upgraded seats, which had much more legroom and better cushioning than the cramped seats they had expected. He brought them pillows and blankets without being asked, and made sure they were comfortable before takeoff. The flight to Dublin was everything they had hoped for and more. The three friends sat together in their comfortable seats, enjoyed complimentary meals that were actually delicious, and marveled at how different travel could be when you knew what to ask for. They talked and laughed throughout the flight, sharing stories and making plans for their visit. As the plane began its descent into Dublin, Rose looked out the window at the green Irish countryside below and felt tears of joy streaming down her face. "I never thought I'd see my son again," she whispered to her friends. "I was so afraid of flying alone and couldn't afford the expensive tickets." William patted her hand gently. "Now you know you're never alone," he said with a smile. "And travel doesn't have to cost a fortune." The trip to Dublin was more successful than any of them had imagined. When Rose walked through the arrival gate at Dublin Airport, her son Michael was waiting with his arms wide open. The reunion was beautiful and emotional, bringing tears of joy to everyone's eyes. Michael had been deeply worried about his mother's isolation back in England, and he was completely amazed by her transformation into a confident traveler. He couldn't believe this was the same woman who had been too afraid to leave her village just a month. As earlier, Rose spent a wonderful week with her son and his family. She played with her grandchildren, cooked traditional meals, and shared stories about her new adventures. Michael was so proud of his mother's courage and independence. When it was time for her to return home, he hugged her tightly and said, "Mom, you're like a completely different person. You seem so happy and alive again," inspired by their successful trip and Rose's beautiful reunion. Dorothy finally found the courage to make a phone call she had been putting off for weeks. She picked up the telephone and dialed her daughter Emma's number in London. Her hands were shaking as she waited for Emma to answer. The conversation was awkward at first, with long pauses and careful words. Both mother and daughter had been hurt by their argument years earlier, and neither was sure how to begin healing the wounds. But Dorothy's new confidence, gained from her travels and adventures, helped her express feelings she had kept buried deep in her heart for years. "I know we've had our differences, Emma," Dorothy said, her voice trembling with emotion. "But I've learned that life is too short to let pride keep us apart. I'd like to try again. I want to be part of your life." Emma's voice was soft and filled with tears. "I'd like that too, Mom. I've missed you so much. I've been wanting to call you, but I didn't know how." They talked for over an hour, sharing their feelings and beginning to rebuild the bridge that had been broken between them. Dorothy told Emma about her travels, her new friends, and how she had discovered that she was stronger and braver than she had ever imagined. William, meanwhile, had been inspired by the group's success and decided to take a bold step. He booked his first solo trip in 2 years, choosing to fly to Edinburgh to visit his grandchildren. The idea of traveling alone had terrified him since his wife Margaret had passed away. But he used all the tips and knowledge the group had gathered together. When William arrived at the airport, he felt nervous but prepared. He approached the check-in counter and confidently asked about senior services. The airline staff were helpful and kind. Just as Dorothy had promised they would be, he received priority boarding, a comfortable seat, and assistance with his luggage. During the flight, William realized that traveling alone didn't have to be lonely or frightening. He could do this on his own. The visit with his grandchildren was magical. They were delighted to see their grandfather, and William felt a joy hadn't experienced since losing his wife. He took them to parks, told them stories, and remembered how much he loved being a grandfather. When William returned home, Dorothy and Rose could see immediately that something had changed in him. He had a new spark in his eyes, a confidence in his posture, and a smile that reached his heart. I felt like myself again, he told Dorothy and Rose during their weekly tea at the community center. For the first time since Margaret died, I felt capable and independent. I realized that I can still have adventures and make new memories. Rose, energized by her own successful trip and inspired by William's courage, had started planning her next adventure. I want to visit my sister in Wales, she announced to her friends. We haven't seen each other in 5 years because we both thought travel was too difficult. But now I know it's not difficult at all when you know what to ask for. The three friends now met weekly at the community center, but their conversations had completely changed. Instead of talking about aches and pains or complaining about getting older, they shared their travel experiences and planned new adventures. They had discovered that the world was still open to them, despite their age. Dorothy had started keeping a travel journal, writing down all the places she wanted to visit and the people she wanted to see. William had begun researching historical sites he wanted to explore. Rose had contacted relatives she hadn't spoken to in years, making plans for visits. They had learned that age was not a prison, but simply a number. With the right knowledge and a little courage, they could still explore, discover, and create new memories. 6 months after that first flight to Dublin, Dorothy had become known throughout her village and beyond as the travel angel. Word had spread quickly about the elderly woman who had discovered the secrets of comfortable and affordable air travel for seniors. People from neighboring towns began calling her on the telephone and visiting her small cottage to ask for advice about airline benefits and travel tips. Dorothy's kitchen table had become a gathering place where seniors would sit with cups of tea, listening to her explain how to navigate airports, what questions to ask airline staff, and how to make travel affordable and comfortable. She never charged anyone for her advice, believing that this knowledge was too important to keep behind locked doors, recognizing that she couldn't help everyone individually. Dorothy had created a simple, handwritten guide titled Flying After 70. What Airlines Don't Tell You. She had spent weeks carefully writing out every detail she had learned, from how to request priority boarding to what special meals were available. Her handwriting was neat and clear, making it easy for other seniors to read and understand. The local library had immediately offered to make copies of Dorothy's guide, and soon senior centers across the entire region began sharing it with their members. Dorothy received letters from elderly people all over England, thanking her for changing their lives and helping them reconnect with distant family members. I never thought I'd become a travel expert at 72. Dorothy laughed as she sat with William and Rose at their usual table in the community center, planning their next adventure together. They had become inseparable friends, and their weekly meetings had grown into something much larger. Dorothy's relationship with her daughter Emma had healed beautifully over the past months. They spoke on the telephone every week, sharing stories and rebuilding the trust that had been broken years earlier. Emma was getting married in 6 months, and Dorothy would be there as the proud mother of the bride. She had already booked her flight to London, and thanks to the money she had saved using senior discounts and benefits, she could afford to fly first class for this special occasion. William had transformed from a lonely widower into an adventurous traveler. He had visited his grandchildren in Scotland 3 more times, and each trip had made him feel stronger and more confident. He was currently planning something very special, a trip to France. Something he and his late wife Margaret had always dreamed of doing together, but never had the chance to accomplish. "She would be so proud of me," William said quietly to Dorothy and Rose as he showed them the travel brochures for Paris and the French countryside. "Margaret always said we would visit France someday. And now I'm going to do it for both of us." Rose had surprised everyone by becoming the most adventurous traveler of the group. She had taken 4 trips in 6 months, visiting relatives and friends she hadn't seen in years. Her confidence had grown with each journey. And she was currently planning the most meaningful trip of all, a journey to see her childhood home in Northern Ireland, where she had been born and raised before moving to England as a young woman. On a sunny Tuesday afternoon, the 3 friends sat in the community center. But they were not alone. They were surrounded by a group of 20 seniors who had come to learn about travel benefits and hear their inspiring story. Dorothy stood up slowly, her small notebook in her hand, ready to share their story once again. "It's never too late to discover something new about yourself," Dorothy began, her voice strong and clear. "We spent years thinking we were too old, too poor, or too afraid to travel. We accepted limitations that were never real. But we learned that knowledge is power, and asking questions can change everything." She looked round the room at faces filled with hope and curiosity. Many of these people had been living isolated lives, believing that their traveling days were over. But Dorothy could see the spark of possibility beginning to light up their eyes. 6 months ago, I was sitting in a cramped airplane seat, struggling with my luggage and accepting discomfort as normal. Dorothy continued. "Today, I've traveled more than I did in the previous 10 years combined. I've repaired my relationship with my daughter, and I've helped dozens of people reconnect with their families." William and Rose stood up beside their dear friend, showing the group that they were living proof that change was possible at any age. Dorothy looked at her dear friends and smiled with deep satisfaction. "The sky is not the limit," she said with conviction. "It's just the beginning, the end."